My father knew Mr. Jinnah when he was a leading lawyer in Bombay. In the girls' school, we are getting girls from 41 villages, and they come on their own. Half the population was non-Muslim, so it was a very colorful city and a very peaceful city.
Assalamu alaikum ji. My name is Faisal Haroon and I'm an architect and artist by profession. And today I have the honor of being with somebody that I hold in very high regard. I have known him for 15 years plus now, and he has given me this opportunity to ask him some questions that I feel should become part of history, given his immense experience of seeing so much that has happened over the last 95 years. So my guest today is Syed Babar Ali. Sir, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Pleasure.
Being an architect, I would first like to ask you about the city that you were born in and you lived in most of your life. We have all the books that we have, some we have lost to time, and we have people telling us about how the Mall Road was, what the Park Tea House was, and all the buildings that came after. But if you can give us a little sketch about your younger days when you were in your teens and your early memories of Lahore and then later, what would that be like?
Well, as you said earlier, I was born in Lahore, I studied in Lahore, I lived in Lahore most of my life, and I've loved Lahore. Lahore till the time of partition was a city which had a fairly defined boundaries. You had the walled city, which was the heart of the city. Then you had the civilian population called the civil lines. Then you had the cantonment, but these were defined areas, and there was hardly any sign of any sprawling sort of expansion like the Juggies or anything like that. And the Lahore that I remember was more associated with people rather than buildings. You took it for granted that the mall was the sort of the Fifth Avenue of Lahore, where the leading shops were there, leading restaurants were there. We only had one main hotel, that was the Needles Hotel, where today the Avari Hotel exists. So, and of course the government house was always there, Hson College was there, the mall, the canal was a very important part of Lahore, and on one side of the canal was for traffic, the other side of the canal was a riding tan. People who had horses would ride right from Moghalpura all the way to beyond Firozpur Road on the other side. And of course this tan also ran parallel to the mall right up to where Wapda House today is. So it was a city which had its defined character, and everyone loved every bit of it. Of course, there were a lot of activities here. The university ground was always an area of interest to students, both from schools and colleges, to go and see hockey matches, cricket matches. And then, of course, where the Jilani Park today is, that used to be the race course.
Yes.
And it all was a very active activity for the elite of Lahore twice a week. And my family was interested in raising, in owning race horses, not betting, but just it was a part of you're supposed to be, if you belong to a certain society, you owned race horses. So it was a very cultured, very stable city. Of course, the cinemas were there. 3 or 4 cinemas were dedicated to English movies, and then of course the Indian movies are mostly on McLeod Road. On the mall you had off the mall you had the Plaza Cinema and the Regal Cinema, which always exhibited English movies. And then of course once a year or twice a year you had dance troupes that came here and they performed on the stages of these cinemas that were dedicated to English movies. So it was a very settled city with half the population was non-Muslim, so it was a very colorful city and a very peaceful city. Of course, we celebrated the festivals, Eid festivals, the Holi, Dussehra, and Diwali belonging to other the non-Muslim. And then, of course, during Muharram, it was a very solemn occasion where many of the non-Muslims participated in the observing the Muharram rituals. So it was a wonderful time.
So given that time, and this is the infrastructure of Lahore. When you spoke about the city known for its people, who were those people that come to your mind that you might have even met over those years who contributed to the city and to its well-being? Can you tell us something about that?
Well, I mean, there were two categories of the people that I interacted with. One was people who knew my father, and my father was a very social person in the sense that he was always inviting people to his house, either for tea or for lunch or for dinner. So it was mandatory for me from the age of 8 onwards to be present on such occasions. And these were people who were either belonging to either they were belonging to the business community or to the social elite.
Yes.
People who came from different backgrounds, people who were so-called the feudal class, who may not be, Lahore may not have been their home, but Lahore being a magnet of people of northern India to come to Lahore, so many of them came and many of them knew my father, so they would come and visit with him, and so that was one. The other set of people that I interacted with, of course, were the families of my classmates. I went to Eastern College for a number of years. 9 years I was there, from class 1 to higher school certificate. And so these people, again, half the students at Eastern College were non-Muslims, and most of my friends were non-Muslims. So I got to know them. I used to visit their homes, and their sons, who were my classmates or college mates, would come to our house. So these were people, and many of the parents of my friends knew my family already, because in those days Eastern College was a college which was dedicated to the elitist population of Lahore. So it was a fairly, I would say, a segregated kind of interaction.
Yes.
You did meet people. When I went to government college, for instance, it was a college where you had people from different strata of society, but there was very little of social interaction with them. You met them at the school, at the college, and you respected them. You became acquaintances, not friends, because friends, it was a very deep kind of a relationship. And so it carried on like that.
So another question that I really wanted to ask you is, people who know you are familiar with your artistic side, and very few people actually know about the Naqsh School of Art. How did that start? Why did you decide to give that place that is so dear to you to an art school, and where do you see it going?
Well, I'll come to that later on, but I'll tell you, I really got interested in art, architecture, and things related to it. Through my good fortune, I met Mehdi Ali Mirza, who was the chief architect of the government of Pakistan in Karachi.
And your house.
I used to live in Karachi in those days, and I met him through a friend who I knew from Edson College. His father was a teacher there. He wasn't a student at Edson, but he lived at Edson because his father was a teacher. This was Mr. Qayyum, who later, he was a civil engineer. He set up a company called Noon & Qayyum. And my parents were very keen that I should have a home of my own. And because the property in Karachi that they had bought had been in my name, and they said, it's time that you should have a nest because that would prompt me to get married.
Right.
And through Qayyum, I met with Mr. Mirza, Mehdi Ali Mirza, and I went to him to request him to have a look at the house, to design a house for me. And he said, I want to know you before I design the house, so that what kind of person you are. So we became very good friends. And so I was not married at that time, and I gave him a free hand. I said, here is the property. This is the land that is allotted to me. Now, let your imagination go wild, and things that you always wanted to do and could not do, do it here. So he was very excited about it. He studied at the J.J. School of Art in Bombay, and during the war there was a shortage of people working in factories in the UK, so they called them the Bevan boys.
Yeah.
A large number of talented young people were shipped to men were shipped to England to work in factories because many of the male population of England had been recruited in the army.
Yes.
So he spent time there, and he got his associate, he became an ARIBA, and then he met a lady there from Estonia who had also come to England to study. So they married, and then he came back to India. He was in Delhi, and at that time of partition, he opted to come to Pakistan. So with that kind of background, so he was not frustrated, but he was handicapped because the government, didn't have that much resources, and there were too much restriction on what new buildings could come up. So this house of mine was one opportunity for him to go to town. So, and I became and would you believe it, it took about 2.5 years to finish that house, and he would come there every day to supervise it, and he selected the artisans who would work both on the woodwork and the stonework and the masonry.
So this was the house in Karachi or in Lahore, or
No, in
both?
Karachi.
In Karachi,
Karachi
the
house.
first one. Yeah.
And later on he built. So I found out that he was interested in art, literature, and so he then, and then during this 10 years that we were closely working, Islamabad had just been announced by General Ayub, and there was a kind of a flow of leading architects of the world coming to Pakistan. And Mirza, being the chief architect there, he would be their local guide. And through him, I had the opportunity to meet with Edward Stone and
Doxiadis
and
as well.
Doxiadis.
Yeah.
Well, Doxiadis was a bit controversial because he was Greek, and he had been thrust on Pakistan by USAID because he had a political kind of ambition in Greece and all that. But anyway, and then there was an Englishman by the name of William Whitfield, He was an outstanding architect. And just to give Whitfield's background, after the war, the first British government building that had been announced was a building close to the House of Commons. And it was an open competition which William Whitfield won. But unfortunately, this building was never constructed.
Okay.
So, and William Whitfield had bid for the new campus of the Punjab University, but because of political wire pulling, the contract went to Doxiadis, and that was rather an ugly decision by the government. So that was how I got involved with architects and literature and poetry, because Mirza was what we call Harfan Maula. He was interested in calligraphy, he was interested in art, he was interested in music, he was interested in architecture. So he
opened the doors for you. Yeah.
And coming back to this National College, this next School of Art, this Haveli that we call it Mubarak Begum Haveli is named after my mother. It belonged to my mother's family. So when my mother's family decided to move out of the walled city, my father, who didn't belong to the Fakir family, offered to buy this property. Not only this property that belonged to his in-laws, but also adjoining property belonging to other members, the larger family members of the Fakir family. He bought them. So he passed away in 1961, and he put all this property into his trust. So I was given responsibility by my brothers to look after this property, and then, of course, the dilemma was what to do with it. There were a lot of suggestions, and so one idea that came up by some of my colleagues at Packages who had studied at the National College of Art, that why don't you put up an art school for the less privileged people who cannot afford or cannot get into National College of Art. So that was the genesis of the next school.
Yes.
And it's been going there for about 25 years now. Yes. And it has graduated maybe 100 good artists. Yes. And it specializes in miniature art, in calligraphy, in ceramics, many of the things that National College does. But here it's a kind of a revolving door. There is no qualification to get in. There is people who can afford to pay. They pay a nominal fee of 1,000 rupees a month, and those who cannot afford it, they get free admission, and all the materials that you use are provided by the school. So it is funded by my foundation.
Yes.
And I think it's a good investment. We've had at least, I would say, more than 100 people who are qualified and quality artists in miniature art. And of course, there are many more who can do quality calligraphy and ceramic work. And so it's a good place for me to go on Sundays and interact with these people.
Yes, you have every reason to be proud of what is coming out of Naqsh School. Just moving on to art and artists, and you must have met so many of them, and I don't mean in Pakistan but abroad as well. What do you think artists in Pakistan, what message would you give them in today's times? What is their relevance in your opinion? How can they contribute? What's their role in the society of today?
Well, I mean, artists, as you know, are people who are very unconventional by nature. They have to be. Also, I think they provide a very important outlet for the feelings of society. They express things in color, in pictures, in diagrams, which people may not be able to express in writing. And also it defines the basic culture of the nation itself, what kind of society you are in, and true artists express their society. Of course, they struggle all the time. I mean, very few artists make it in their lifetime.
Yes.
The good ones are lucky to get a good price, but long after they're dead.
Yes.
And so this is a, and I think also, well, between them and the poets, there is a kind of a competition as to who gets more recognition in the lifetime, and I think both of them suffer from that disability and not recognized.
It's a lost race for both of them, I think. And so, Babar Sahib, also a lot of people don't know that you have an impeccable taste in music, which I actually found out. If you remember, we were at this gathering where there was this classical singer who had come to Pakistan, and of very good note. And I found out for the first time that you had an ear and a heart for deep classical music. When did that start?
That again is I would give credit to my mother.
Okay.
My father was totally not averse to it, but certainly he had no interest in music at all. And my mother, who came from the Fakir Khana family, and as you know, the Fakir Khana people lived in the walled city and very close to Hira Mandi, which was the center of not only beauty but music also.
Yes.
So many of the fakirs were patrons of that music. And I can tell you that my mother knew that there was a friend of mine who lived in Old Tahsil. Right. He was my age. And she would whisper to me, why don't you ask him to arrange a mujra, which you go and listen to classical music there. Yes. Which I would do without my father ever knowing about it.
Okay.
So this is how I was initiated into listening to this music, and it was serious music. I mean, I can tell you the tabla player there was the ustad of Allah Rakha, whose son, what's his name, is the prime tabla player in India today.
Zakir
Hussain.
Yes.
So that was the quality of music that I was exposed to in my mid-teens.
Okay, so that's where it started.
Yeah, and then of course soon after partition, when I was living in Karachi, I had very close friends who were also interested in music, and of course my cousin Fakir Wahiduddin, he was also living in Karachi and also dedicated to music. So he used to have regular sittings with the classical music. Bade Ghulam Ali was in Karachi in those days, and at least once a week he would come to Fakir Wahiduddin's house, and also he came to our house to give a performance. I also had the privilege of listening to at my friend Ishaq Habibullah's house to the great Bundu Khan, who was maestro of Sarangi music. His son Umrao Khan, who later on tried to usurp his father's name and became Umrao Bundu Khan.
Okay.
And then of course my nephew Asad Ali, who's the eldest son of my elder brother Syed Amjad Ali, was very much interested in Qawwali and also in music. So he would then at least have once a week Qawwali, and we were very lucky in Karachi. There was more than one family who migrated from Delhi, and Delhi, as you know, was the center of Qawwali in India because of Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia, and these people used to sing at the shrine of Hazrat Nizamuddin. And I can also tell you that in my infant days, because my father had business in Delhi, maybe I was 4 or 5 years old, and we used to go to we lived in Delhi at that time, and my mother used to take me to Hazrat Nizamuddin, and would make me sit with the qawwals there and sing
Okay.
with them
Okay.
at the age of 4 and 5. So
it started as early as being
Yes.
4 and 5.
And I did have a good, I never got any training in music, but I developed a good ear for music. So it stayed with me when qawwali, whether it was instrumental music or vocal music. And then of course, while we were living in Lahore in the early 60s, we had many sittings with Roshnara Begum.
Okay.
Again, a great one of the great singers. And then, of course, I got married, and our elder daughter, she got interested in music and became very friendly with Noor Jahan.
Acha.
And so Noor Jahan would either come to us, or she would go there and drag us along. So we had all this interaction with some of the leading musicians and singers and vocal artists of Pakistan.
Any memory of Noor Jahan that you would like to share that people might not know about?
Noor Jahan knew about my mother because she came from Fakir Khana, and Noor Jahan started her life also in that part of Lahore.
Right.
And so my mother would send for her, and Noor Jahan would come, and my mother was always sort of, she was elderly, and she had her, in the winter month, in the summer, she would be sitting on a bed, and Noor Jahan would always come and sit on the lower side of the bed, giving that respect to my mother. So, and she would also, my mother had a good ear for music, so I would croon.
Yes.
There was no instruments.
Yes.
So she was very welcome to our house.
You have a love for cooking.
Yes.
And I can see that smile, and I share that with you. Where did that start? How often do you cook now?
Well, it started with my mother again.
Okay.
Because she, of course, I don't remember her cooking anything, but she trained the cooks, and most of our cooks were women cook. And I always overheard her giving instructions what to do and what not to do. And what we ate was very simple, but it was nothing like mother's cooking. And so that's how I got interested in, and of course, my elder brother Syed Amjad Ali, who traveled a lot and lived abroad quite a bit. So he was also very interested in cooking, and he generally spent time in the kitchen abroad because there was no other way that he could serve his guests. And so I sort of dabbled in it, and I got interested, and I keep on learning and trying new recipes. Now I have a person working in our house who's not a cook, but he's trained into a cook. He can carry out any instructions, and so we play around. And during my stay with my granddaughter in America, in Palo Alto, she's also interested in cooking, and she would then book me to a cooking class. In France you have Cordon Bleu running kitchens, but in America, and certainly on the West Coast, you have an organization called Sur la Table. So they sell kitchenware and things like that, but also at the back they have a kitchen where they train 8 or 10 people at a time, and you run through about 3 different dishes for a sitting. And so she would sign me up, and they have a program, whether it's Thai cook, or it's Mediterranean food, or it's American food. So we had the opportunity to attend these classes, and so it's a good hobby. And I once I had the opportunity to go to France a few times, and I had an elderly friend there, and we were discussing about food, and he said, "No, you got to eat anyhow because to live, to remain healthy and active. So lucky are the people who are interested in food. If you are interested in what you have to eat, so it's not a force feeding. You enjoy food."
Yes.
So and also because I've traveled quite a bit in Europe and in America, both north and south. So one had the exposure, and of course China and Japan.
Yes, a whole new world.
Each
Of
country
course.
has its own, cuisine. So, except for sushi, I love Japanese food. And of course, Scandinavia has its own speciality. So I've been very fortunate in traveling around, and of course, not to miss out the excellent food in Morocco, which is a fusion of Arab food and Arab, Spanish, and French. So I've been very fortunate.
And are you cooking these days?
Not directly, but I have a kitchen which my wife keeps on complaining that I've got every kind of a dish and an implement there, including a hibachi, which is a Japanese, cooking stove. But I love cooking. I love to collect things for the kitchen.
Yes, yes, great. That's a true. That's a person who has a passion for food, because then you start collecting everything around that. Babar Sahib, how well do you know Iqbal? And I ask that for the younger generation. I know you never met him, but you did meet Mr. Jinnah, and that is the second part of the question. I would like you to, if you can, share that experience with the audience, that of your meeting with Mr. Jinnah, the only meeting that you had in that way. But Iqbal and Jinnah, what can you tell us about them? These are our heroes, and
Iqbal, stands on its own. I mean, in the sense that he was very close to my Khalu, Fakir Najmuddin. This is Ijazuddin's grandfather. He was in the civil service. He was Tahsildar in Daska.
right?
And he got to know Dr. Iqbal when he was studying at Murray College in Sialkot. So that friendship continued till my uncle died, somewhere in the 40s. And so Iqbal would come to the house, to my uncle's house, and of course also introduced to my father and my elder brother Syed Amjad Ali. He worked for the Muslim delegation to the Round Table Conference in early 30s. And Iqbal was a member of that delegation. So he spent a lot of time with Dr. Iqbal in London. And of course, he knew him before London also, because he was introduced. My father knew Dr. Iqbal. And so my brother Amjad Ali was 20 years older than me. So he knew Dr. Saab quite well. And so when I was growing up, Ali Baksh used to come out to our house, who was Dr. Saab's sort of major domo. And he was keen to have younger members of his family employed by us. So the person who looked after me when I was at Edson College for about 7, 8 years was a person by the name of Noor Muhammad, who belonged to the same village as Ali Baksh, and that was Shakargarh in Hoshiarpur district. And so that was my relationship through Ali Bakhsh, and Ali Bakhsh brought one day a postcard which was written by Dr. Iqbal. I still have it in his own handwriting, addressed to somebody. And he said, here is this thing. So, and then of course, growing up, I got to know, and after Dr. Saab passed away, I got to know Javed quite well, because his sister, Munira Bibi, was at school with my wife at Queen Mary College.
All right.
And so there was a lot of, meeting with both Javed and Munira Bibi. They were coming to our house and we used to go to their house. So that was the nearest I got to Dr. Iqbal. But of course, during my school days, my mother was also very keen that I should study Indian poetry. And during summer holidays, we used to go to the hill station. We used to go to Murray, and then later on we used to go to Kashmir, Srinagar. And he would always take a tutor, not from Asian College, a tutor who was specialized in Urdu and Persian, so that we could spend those 2-3 months learning about poetry. And Iqbal was certainly one of the main poets that one learnt about. And of course, I learned Shikwa by heart at the age of 12 or 13, and I can still recite part of it. Not Jawabi Shikwa, but the Shikwa itself.
Okay.
And then, of course, I knew many of his poems from Bali Jibril and from Bange Dara. So this became a part of my life. And even recently, I have been reading Iqbal. So Iqbal, I believe, was much greater than he's even recognized by the people today. Now, Mr. Jinnah, my family, my father knew Mr. Jinnah about the same time as he became head of the Muslim League, or before that, when he was a leading lawyer in Bombay. And he used to consult him on business matters. So my elder brother, Syed Babar Ali, who was working for the family business in Bombay, was introduced to Mr. Jinnah, and he would go and call on him and, look after him. So he became quite, I would say, not friendly, but he was always in contact with Mr. Jinnah. And I, as a student, was in Bombay, and one day he asked me, he said, Jinnah Sahab se milna hai? So I said, yes.
Okay.
So he called up his secretary and he said, my brother is here from Lahore, can I bring him over? So he took me there and we met, and then he asked us for lunch. So I had the privilege of having lunch with him. But I was just a dumb listener.
Okay.
But because I was totally overawed by his person. I was maybe 15, 16 years old. And a year later, I was in Delhi with my father. And of course, whenever Mr. Jinnah was in Delhi for the Central Assembly there, my father, who was frequently in Delhi, I called him up and he said, I'd like to come and pay my respects to you. So he said, come and have lunch. And he said, my son is with me.
Okay.
So I had the privilege of having lunch with Mr. Jinnah in his Delhi house also, which was on 10 Aurangzeb Road. But that was my contact with him. But then, of course, in around 1945, Mr. Jinnah, was coming to Lahore quite frequently, because he was very keen that the Muslims of the Punjab Assembly should join Muslim League. They were members of the Unionist Party, and that was a unionist government by Khizr Hayat. So he would come to Lahore at least 2-3 times a year, and whenever he came, my father would have host a dinner for him or a meal, and my mother this time organized a ladies' party for Miss Jinnah. So she came over to the house, and my nieces were there who were very keen on singing, and so they sang a song for him, which was
For her.
Political song.
For her, for Miss Jinnah.
For Miss Jinnah. And I still remember a few words of it. It was taken off from one of the one of the Bollywood songs. It's written something like this: lament by Khizr that jab tu bhi chale England bajakar band Glancy. Glancy was the governor, he'd gone to England. Jab tu bhi chale England bajakar band Glancy pyara, council mein kaun hamara. And Chotu Ram was one of the ministers. So he passed away. So अब छोटू राम भी पास नहीं, अब जीने की कोई आस नहीं, अब छोटू राम भी पास नहीं. So I sang the song. And Nawab, Mr. Jinnah and Mr. and Miss Jinnah was staying with Nawab Mamdot, which was, as the Americans say, 1 block away from our house. So the next morning, Nawab Mamdot's Major Domo, I knew him very well, Jeela, we used to play cricket together. Jeela came over and he said, कि मिस जना उस बीबी ਨੂੰ बुला रहे हैं जिसने कल गाया सी. So my niece was living in a house next door to us. And so I said, चलो जना साहब मिस जना ने बुलाया. So we walked across and we went and sat in the drawing room, and Miss Jinnah came in and she said, can you wait a few minutes? Mr. Jinnah will also come. So he came, and of course she said, can you sing? And she sang for him. And of course he understood almost nothing of it. And then he said to her, he said, you sing slowly, and he pointed to me, and you translate what you sing.
Okay.
And he put on his monocle. Yes. So that was a human part of his that he... So
you had the honor of being his official translator on one occasion at least.
But it was good fun.
Yes, yes. Babar Sahib, can you tell us something? I've been involved at your village in Qusur, Saidawala, and you have undertaken a couple of projects there to uplift the standard of living for the people over there. What is the history of Saidawala, and where is it today? Where do you see it going?
Well, Saidawala, this land, this village belonged to the Bedi family. Bedis are the equivalent of Sayyids of Sikhs.
Yeah, the direct descendants of
Guru Nanak.
Yeah,
so probably in Ranjit Singh's time they had this thing. And as it happens with most feudal families, so around 1932, the family wanted to sell this village. And so my father and my uncle, they had resources, and a broker came to them and said there is a village available, and so they bought it. So it was known as Bawewala.
Okay.
Babas are equivalent of Sayyids.
Okay.
So now it is known as Saidawala because of us. But in the Patwari record, it's still known as Bawewala. So, this was being managed by a manager and this and that. And then later on, it was managed by a nephew of mine. So nobody was getting any income, belonging to two brothers and then divided among the sibling by the children of the two brothers. So then finally they said, they asked me, can you take this over? So I took it over about 10 years ago. Okay. And so I started going there, and then I thought that, we should do something here, not just have it as a source of income and there was very little income coming from there anyhow. So we thought that, all right, we had my father created some foundations and they had resources. So I said, let's try and do something for the people of not only this village, this area. So that is how you came into the picture, and we have built the boys' school, and the girls' school first, and then the boys' school. And we find that there was so much need for schooling that in the girls' school we are getting girls from 41 villages, and they come on their own. We don't charge any fees. We don't. So everything that they get there is
And breakfast and lunch.
Lunch, yeah.
And cooking
Right.
classes as well.
Huh?
And cooking classes.
Yeah, we've started that. The whole idea is to provide them with opportunities so that they can break out of poverty. They can get a job. And I'm glad to tell you that some of the girls, 2 girls got into police. And there are 5 girls who have got into nursing. And the whole idea is to uplift the opportunity for the women in that area. And hopefully this can be replicated by others.
And I believe everybody has excellent handwriting because of.
Yeah, we have a very good calligraphist there.
Yeah.
So he's, and surprisingly, he's a trained calligraphist in Nastaliq, but he's also very good, writes very good English. So both the boys and the girls have better writing than in most schools that you have.
Yes, yes. Babar Sahab, let's end on a lighter note. You must be familiar with this program on TV, Ek Din Jio Ke Saath. So what would be that Ek Din with Syed Babar Ali? What time do you wake up? What do you do? How do you end your day?
Now I used to wake up at sunrise in the olden days because I used to go riding.
Okay.
And but now with age I have to slow down. And when I go to work, I go for a walk in the morning.
So what time do you wake up generally?
About 8-ish.
Okay.
And then I say my prayers. My morning prayers are very long.
Yes. But I wonder what time you go to sleep because I receive messages from you at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. in the morning.
Get up to go to the washroom.
Okay.
Okay. And I look at my telephone at that.
Okay.
And many things I remember, which I think I better get rid of it now before I forget about it.
Right.
So that's why I sent it to you. But then I go to work and come home and walk again, and I don't see any television at all. Okay. But I see on weekends I spend a lot of time on the iPad, listening to music and discussions and
lectures. Yep. And so, do you socialize? Do you go anywhere?
I mean, if I meet anybody, I want to invite him to the house.
Yes, of course.
But they have to come
On
very
time,
early,
and
very
then
early
leave on time as well. Well, thank you, Babar Sahab. It was a privilege, and I was able to ask what I always, questions I had in my mind.
I hope it was useful.